The stars did not change, yet the voices between them were gone. Across the Orion Spur and beyond the Perseus Edge, transmitters that once traded laughter, mathematics, and warnings fell mute. For the first time in 8 million cycles, the galaxy listened to itself and heard only the slow heartbeat of quasars. The hush unsettled every species old enough to remember a busier sky. At first they called it a glitch in the long-range arrays. Then they checked the secondary networks, the relic channels built before the Concorde, and found emptiness there too. By the 3rd century of silence, the phenomenon had a name spoken with reverence: the Great Pause. The Avrani recorded the last clear message, a fragment of melody transmitted from the Zeph caravans. It ended mid-note, no sign-off, no distress beacon. Scholars replayed that note for generations, trying to decide if the performer knew extinction was imminent. The Celth argued against any romantic explanation. To them, the Great Pause was a statistical inevitability. Civilizations reached thresholds, triggered catastrophic chain reactions, and vanished. The Mir disagreed. They sensed intention behind the stillness, as if something vast demanded quiet. None possessed evidence, but each believed enough to shape policy around it. Archives swelled with conjecture. Historians mapped every star that once relayed commerce chatter, cultural lectures, or engineering disputes. Patterns were sought and lost in the noise. The hush mocked them, patient and complete. Merchant guilds collapsed. Navigation became perilous, without cooperative beacons. Worlds retreated inward, dimming their emissions for fear of luring predators described only in rumor. Even the boldest research fleets folded sails and coasted in darkness. The galaxy, once a lattice of voices, became an archipelago of whispers. Tvar was born after the pause began, yet felt nostalgia for an age never lived. An archivist by training, they roamed the basalt libraries of Vectra collecting transmissions etched in crystal from before the hush. Voices filled their waking hours. Mathematical duels between Jovari scholars, a poem about rain recited by 3 suns' light, a frantic confession from an explorer trapped inside an event horizon. These shards of sound formed a childhood more vivid than their own village. Tvar believed silence was not a conclusion but a preface. Something waited beyond the stillness. During a routine sweep of ancient relay stations, Tvar uncovered a neglected array perched above the dim dwarf Y-89. It hummed faintly, as if straining to remember a language. When they aligned its dish toward the minor spiral on the edge of mapped space, the receiver trembled with a pattern unlike the usual cosmic hiss. The pulse was uneven, crude, composed of bursts and gaps stacked in repeating groups. It resembled no known tongue, yet felt purposeful, as though whoever sent it wanted to be understood by anyone, not merely their own kind. Excitement warred with caution. The Avrani Council had strict edicts forbidding interference with anomalous sources until full threat assessments were complete. But Tvar's fingers itched across the console. They widened the capture window, tracing the pulses to a yellow star encircled by rocky debris and a few restless planets. Its 3rd sphere glimmered faintly with oxygen signatures. Databases labeled the system Sol, a charting afterthought logged eons prior by an automated probe. The files contained nothing else. Reports submitted to the council triggered immediate debate. Some elders demanded the source be quarantined. Others feared acknowledging it would invite disaster. They recited cautionary tales of civilizations consumed by attention from the dark between galaxies. Yet a minority, mainly younger scholars, argued that ignorance carried equal risk. If the pulses heralded intelligence, better to meet it awake than blind. After 3 rotations of deliberation, permission for passive surveillance was granted. Tvar was appointed lead observer on the grounds that curiosity already bound them to the mystery. Surveillance platforms drifted to the edge of the system. They recorded emissions pouring from the blue-green planet, layered voices, percussive rhythms, structured noise rising above random static. Analysis confirmed pattern density consistent with sapience. More astonishing was the breadth of spectrum employed: radio, microwave, narrow-beam lasers, even primitive chemical bursts in orbit. the inhabitants seemed to experiment with every possible method of shouting into the dark. They were reckless or fearless, perhaps both. Notes from the mere delegate described the transmissions as wild songs from an unshackled mind. Health statisticians instead catalogued demographic signatures, population curves, energy output, thermodynamic waste. Avrani philosophers considered whether such exuberance could endure the dangers that had cowed older species. Tvar, meanwhile, focused on the cadence underlying the chaos. Buried among entertainment and computation was rhythm, almost heartbeat steady, suggesting communal intent rather than isolated accident. Weeks stretched as data amassed. Maps of the planet revealed vast oceans and fragmented continents threaded with settlements. Weather systems shifted rapidly. Magnetic storms licked the upper atmosphere. Evidence indicated the inhabitants had survived numerous self-inflicted crises, conflagrations leaving scars visible from orbit, swathes of chemical contamination gradually healed, orbital debris still circling like a monument to persistence. Against every probability, the species had not erased itself. Instead, it built higher, launched vessels beyond its cradle, and kept transmitting. Some council members grew uneasy. If they endure calamity and grow louder, warned Elder Sieve, they may attract what silenced us. Proposals arose to mask all monitoring activity, even to sabotage the fledgling signals. Others countered that suppression would make them complicit in the same fear that had emptied the stars. Debate ended with stalemate. Observation continued. Contact remained forbidden. Tavares' private logs captured emotions they dared not share officially. There is admiration, even affection, for these chaotic beings who refused to bow to cosmic dread. Where other cultures erected barriers against unknown danger, this one hurled its stories outward. Music, arithmetic, laughter, grief, as if insisting that existence meant dialogue. Tvar wondered if bravery alone explained the Great Pause. Perhaps older species lacked not technology, but the stubborn faith required to keep talking. In the 4th month of study, a sharper signal sliced through the planetary clamor. Unlike previous noise, it bore intentional structure, repeating intervals, escalating complexity, embedded references to its own length. It was a mathematical lighthouse, a declaration of self-awareness meant for anyone with ears. Spectral analysis revealed precise energy shaping, proof of advanced instrumentation. Whoever composed it wanted to prove intelligence indisputably. The moment this transmission hit the Council archives, caution hardened into alarm. Protocol demanded cross-species assembly when emergent intelligences displayed interstellar aspiration. Factions prepared memos advocating either diplomatic initiation or preemptive containment. Rumors hinted at a classified dossier describing a predator once drawn to similar broadcasts. Whether that predator was real or allegorical remained unsolved. Humanity had spent centuries learning to survive itself before it ever learned to survive the void. The 20th and 21st centuries forged resilience through disasters that would have broken more orderly minds. Plagues burned through cities, oceans rose, climates buckled, weapons threatened extinction. Each era wrote a new obituary for the species, yet every prediction dissolved under the stubborn fact of persistence. Out of that turbulent inheritance came a people who looked at the dark between stars and saw invitation rather than warning. When a faint lattice of signals brushed the sensors of an aging lunar array, no committee voted to hide. Scientists argued, engineers improvised, storytellers spun narratives about neighbors waiting beyond the horizon, and a dozen exploratory projects received emergency funding overnight. The message they studied was fragile, wrapped in static, repeating with patient regularity. At first it resembled a forgotten echo from some Cold War experiment, but pattern analysis showed intentional modulation, pulses nested in prime intervals, amplitude adjusted in elegant spirals. Humanity's mathematicians were the first to grasp the scope. Someone had carved meaning into noise. That alone would have justified a new golden age of astronomy. But behind the numbers lay an implication that unsettled every discipline. If the code came from intelligence, the galaxy might not be a silent desert after all. Centuries of loneliness were suddenly negotiable. A coalition of spacefaring nations created a task force unbound by ordinary politics. Its charter demanded openness and caution in equal measure, but the prevailing mood tilted toward daring. Laboratories from Lagos to Buenos Aires contributed antenna time. Graduate students in cramped apartments wrote algorithms to sharpen the signal. Retired pilots offered to test whatever ship would carry humankind closer to the source. The narrative was irresistible. After millennia of looking up, the sky had looked back. Humanity's outward-bound fleet was still crude compared with the majestic craft imagined in fiction, yet it embodied an ethos of improvisation. Hulls repurposed from asteroid haulers were fitted with radiation shelters. Propulsion came from hybrid drives assembled in repurposed shipyards. Communication dishes grew from frameworks intended for deep-sea drilling rigs. What they lacked in symmetry, they compensated with audacity. The flagship Resolute launched amid cheers, broadcast live to billions, a single thread tying Earth's diverse cultures to the same anticipatory breath. Inside the ship, crew members wrestled with a paradox that none voiced aloud. They were emissaries of a species still uncertain about peace with itself. Every corridor conversation acknowledged that irony, but it sharpened rather than blunted purpose. If humanity could meet an intelligence beyond Earth, maybe it could meet itself anew. The expedition plan called for a cautious trajectory past the heliopause, then a cruise toward Proxima where an anomalous drone had been spotted decades earlier. Long baseline telescopes would feed them real-time updates on any further transmissions. During transit, Earth's media swelled with speculation. Pundits imagined benevolent mentors, predatory warlords, or indifferent gods. Religions drafted statements to integrate discovery into doctrine. Even cynics, who predicted only disappointment, could not deny the stirring effect of collective wonder. Crime rates dipped. International negotiations accelerated as budgets were redirected to joint research. For the first time in living memory, a single narrative eclipsed parochial rivalries. The Resolute's first major discovery arrived en route to Alpha Centauri. Instruments registered a faint lattice of energy surrounding a metallic object tumbling through interstellar space. Careful approach revealed an ancient probe no larger than a small satellite, scarred by dust collisions yet still transmitting at low power. Its technology was alien to any Earth design, ceramic panels etched with fractal inscriptions, a power core humming at frequencies unknown to terrestrial physics. The device seemed to have been waiting, patient across millennia, its sensors oriented not toward its builders but toward the sun. Engineers debated whether to retrieve it or leave it untouched. Philosophers warned against altering the first genuine artifact of another mind. In the end, a compromise prevailed. Record everything, disturb nothing. The probe became a silent companion, a reminder that humanity had stepped into a conversation already underway. Its orientation suggested it was only a relay, positioned to watch a young civilization's awakening. As the fleet pressed deeper, Earth's arrays intercepted a new transmission. Unlike the initial pulses, this signal brimmed with complexity, sweeping harmonics layered with compressed data blocks, bursts sequenced like verses in an unfamiliar hymn. Decoders teased out mathematical demonstrations, geometric sketches, and tonal structures hinting at music. Anthropologists marveled at the universal impulse. Even across the abyss, intelligence sought to blend precision with beauty. The message invited dialogue but offered no map, only an assurance that comprehension was possible if the listener dared enough patience. In conference rooms bathed in starlight, mission specialists debated response strategy. Some pressed for restraint, citing centuries of human literature warning against careless first contact. Others argued that to remain silent would betray the curiosity that defined the species. Consensus formed slowly. Any answer must reveal capacity for reason without exposing vulnerabilities. A working group drafted packets of mathematics, chemical spectra, and excerpts from the cultural canon, snippets of language, fragments of music stripped of semantic context yet rich in cadence. They wanted to display thought without presumption, to declare existence without threat. When the transmission departed Earth's orbit, applause rippled through observatories. A beam of encoded humanity leapt sunward, carrying prime numbers, visualized constants, and a single open invitation rendered in electromagnetic clarity. To most of the planet, it was just another headline, but to those who had spent lifetimes chasing distant whispers, it was a profound gamble, the first deliberate step into shared destiny. Months passed before a reply arrived. It was brief, 3 bursts spaced exactly as Earth's greeting had been spaced, followed by an intricate modulation that seemed to laugh at the simplicity of primes. Linguists recognized an intentional echo, proof that the sender had heard, understood, and chosen to continue. That moment altered every calculation about humanity's place in the cosmos. Debate shifted from if we are alone to what kind of neighbors we will become. Budgets doubled again. Entire university departments sprang up overnight to study a discipline no one had named. While analysts wrestled with semantics, another drama unfolded among the older civilizations observing from the dark. Their secret councils received news of Earth's exuberant broadcast and convened in cloistered chambers. Some demanded immediate quarantine, lest reckless newcomers awaken old predators. Others felt an unaccustomed stirring of hope. The galaxy had known silence for so long that even peril seemed preferable to endless stasis. Humanity, ignorant of those deliberations, kept refining its decoders, convinced that persistence alone would unlock the next layer of understanding. The vessels that drifted into the outer dark were not shaped for war, yet every contour hinted at caution. They arrived without lights, engines trimmed to whispers, hulls coded to blur their outline against the starfield. Humanity's envoys halted their burn and watched, hearts tight against ribs, while a half-dozen alien craft unfolded panels that gleamed with a subdued, pearlescent glow. For an instant nothing moved, the void stretching taut between them, until a narrow beam touched the Resolute's receiver and spilled a sequence of tones. The cadence was deliberate, almost ceremonial, a language built for minds patient enough to weigh each syllable across years. Translators wrestled with the first layer of meaning and found neither greeting nor threat but an inquiry. Do you comprehend what your presence means? The words, once teased from mathematics into speech, hung heavy. Humanity had not crossed a neutral threshold. It had stepped onto a stage prepared long before its birth. The envoy team debated whether to answer immediately or reflect, but hesitation risked signaling incapacity. The commander chose to respond with clarity. They confirmed awareness of contact, affirmed intent for dialogue, and expressed readiness to learn protocols of coexistence. The message, stripped of ornament, was a promise that the species responsible for Earth would meet responsibilities squarely. The reply arrived layered with historical weight. The elder species explained that the hush surrounding the galaxy was not a natural state but a discipline. Long ago, voices had filled every frequency, exuberant and careless. Something beyond charted space, never named directly, only described as the listener, had descended upon transmitters that sang too freely. Entire archives vanished, colonies reduced to shadows. Out of that devastation came a doctrine. Mute yourselves, hide in the radiance of stars, trust silence to shield you. For ages the creed held, enforced less by weapons than by dread. Civilizations survived by diminishing themselves, by teaching children that curiosity invited death. The envoys warned that humanity's transmissions, unchecked and brazen, had already bent the long-standing accord. Ancient watchers feared that the listener, or whatever principle it embodied, might notice renewed chatter. The delegations spoke not as rulers, but as caretakers of a fragile reprieve. They had gathered to measure whether Earth's newcomers could be persuaded to fold back into secrecy, or whether harsher measures would secure galactic caution. Their tones carried no malice, only weary resolve born of survival at any price. Humanity listened, weighing the calculus of risk and identity. Generations had climbed from caves to orbit by refusing despair, by refusing to accept ceilings on possibility. To retreat into imposed muteness would hollow that inheritance. The delegates argued in long bursts of compressed speech, referencing history, philosophy, and the stubborn statistics of resilience. They acknowledged the danger, yet insisted that sapience deserved the dignity of expression. Without the freedom to speak, invention stagnated, empathy atrophied, cultures withered into repetition. To live was to proclaim existence. That principle, they said, had shepherded them through wars and environmental collapse. It would not be traded for quiet. The conversation stretched over many orbits, a dance between caution and audacity. Some of the older beings softened as they observed the plainness of human resolve. They remembered the first time their own ancestors had tasted the idea of dialogue and how fear had later shackled that impulse. A few even admitted envy, confessing that caution had kept them alive but also stripped wonder from their days. The assembly splintered between guardians of tradition and advocates for renewal. No single verdict could satisfy both instincts, and so they sought compromise. An accord emerged. Humanity would be free to explore and communicate, but it must bear part of the burden once shared by all, the duty to watch for signs of the listener and to prepare responses not just for itself, but for any culture that might be threatened. Monitoring stations would be seeded across interstellar routes, manned cooperatively. Should ominous signatures appear, a council, including humans, would decide how to proceed. It was a fragile trust, contingent on prudence without capitulation. Earth's emissaries accepted, not from subservience, but from recognition that courage required wisdom as well as daring. Even as agreements formed, a fresh alarm pierced the negotiations. Automated sensors detected anomalous energy knots far beyond the core, structures that did not align with natural astrophysics. Archives hinted that such concentrations had preceded previous extinctions. Panic rippled through the gathered envoys. Some argued to scatter and cloak, but humanity proposed direct reconnaissance. Where others envisioned inevitable doom, human strategists saw a problem to map, model, and, if possible, neutralize. Plans for a joint mission coalesced, swift, secret, and spearheaded by crews willing to shoulder risk without waiting for absolute certainty. The investigative expedition pierced the region described in half-forgotten warnings. They discovered a network of machines adrift in cold emptiness, remnants of a vast intelligence rather than a mythical predator. The constructs harvested transmissions, indexing them, tracing their origin, then dispatching autonomous scouts to extinguish senders judged too reckless. The system had long since decayed, yet a few nodes clung to function, running corrupted instructions that could still target noisy civilizations. What the elders had worshipped as the listener was a relic algorithm, dangerous but not omnipotent. Understanding dawned. Silence had never been protection from an all-knowing entity, but camouflage from fallible machinery. With that revelation, strategies shifted from terror to engineering. Human and alien technicians collaborated, designing interference fields to blind the ancient network while preserving interstellar dialogue. The work demanded dexterity and calm. A single error could awaken dormant routines. Human improvisation meshed with alien precision, each approach compensating for the other's limits. Bit by bit, they pried control from obsolete guardians, dismantling beacons programmed to hunt for song. The task took months, punctuated by moments when power spikes threatened to broadcast coordinates of every ship present. During one such surge, a human coder overrode cascading commands by introducing an unscripted pattern drawn from folk music, a solution inconceivable to purely logical minds yet effective because corruption recognized it as valid checksum. When the last hostile process ceased, a hush deeper than any that preceded it settled over the operation site. For the first time since records began, there was no imposed boundary between voices. Space felt unsealed, not empty but waiting. Reports streamed back to the Council describing liberation as a technical fact, not a metaphor. Species that had once resigned themselves to shrinking futures gathered in orbit around a common feed, hesitant yet eager. They listened as humanity transmitted a calm statement affirming shared custody of freedom. The galaxy belonged not to fear, but to those willing to converse and safeguard each other's right to speak. Word spread slowly across old networks. Colonies long dormant powered up relay dishes, nomadic fleets restarted beacon lanterns.